Welcome to ABA On Call. Join myself, Rick Kubina. This is the maturing of our science that can be done, and Doug Kostewicz.
It is so powerful to be able to convey numbers rather than the subjective nature of words.
For thought-provoking conversation. Hey everybody, would you like to get a CEU for this episode? Listen closely for the announcement of 3 secret words delivered throughout the episode. Take note of those words and we will tell you where to go to get your CEU when the show is over.
Before we begin, I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that we did encounter quite a few audio issues in the editing of this episode, so we apologize that there are places where the sound does drop out a couple of times.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to ABA On Call. I am joined by my stalwart co-host, Dr. Doug Kostewicz.
Hello, everybody.
And we have a wonderful guest today, Dr. Tim Fuller.
Hello. Thank you for having me very much.
Well, we couldn't be more excited to have you. We're going to talk about something that is a very hot topic in ABA. And I will admit up front, I will expose some of my own ignorance. We're going to be talking about acceptance and commitment therapy, otherwise known as ACT. And this is one thing that I have read about. I have many good colleagues such as yourself who are practitioners or who know about it, but yet I have never taken the leap into actually doing something in terms of practice myself. So I do have a lot of probably rookie questions, and you being the expert, I'm sure will give us fabulous answers. How's that for building you up?
Yeah, that's perhaps more generous than I deserve. But given the time we have, I'm going to take it.
Fabulous.
Well, let's start off with a very basic question. How would you describe ACT? What is it?
Yeah, so I think that first, I'll go back ever so slightly to amend the notion of my expertise. I feel more comfortable acknowledging a good deal of personal and professional experience with ACT. But I want to be very clear, I'm not a clinical psychologist. I have not had direct mentorship at the scale and depth and quality that would have me feel comfortable saying that I'm going to deliver ACT as a comprehensive strategy to someone. So I don't want to discount those that have dedicated their professional practice to that. The scale of expertise out there is growing. I'm going to do the very best I can given my experience with it. And when I think about what ACT is, I first like to think about what it's trying to accomplish, which is that it is trying to accomplish the daunting task of relieving or alleviating what brings suffering to human beings. And I don't think that it is unique in its position statement. I think there are a lot of clinical applications that would seek to do the same thing. Perhaps what is unique for behavior analysts is that it is firmly rooted in behavior science. And for those that adhere to a radical behavioristic approach to understanding behavior, I think they would find a lot of continuity between those basic assumptions and the assumptions that are laid out in ACT, or perhaps more broadly, contextual behavior science, which is maybe the umbrella term that you would consider both ACT as the clinical application and also relational frame theory, the more experimental, although it does have some applied applications as well. So broad umbrella of contextual behavior science looks to understand the human experience. ACT looking to alleviate those things that we consider, suffering is a really kind of bold term, certainly, but also just the everyday discontent that we all have and are all organized around because we're human. So that's what I would say ACT is. It's a lot more than that, certainly, but at a very introductory level, that's what I think it's trying to do, and that's what I think it is.
Well, that is a very good answer. The dealing with the human suffering part, I think, is or just trying to live a better life, however you want to capture that. Yeah. Everyone who listens to this podcast, and I would say most everybody that's in our field, is going to be able to really appreciate that. So, with that being the general purpose, maybe you could just generally talk about what would that look like? So, you've given us this broad overview, but a practitioner who is doing ACT, is that some kind of therapy? Well, not is it some kind of therapy? That's a really boneheaded question. Yes, it can be used as a therapy, but what does that look like when
Yeah,
you're working with someone?
certainly. So I think again, when you're working with a human being, the assumption that you're going to find from the contextual behavior science community is that a lot of our behavior is organized around language. And because of its foundation in language, uh, there are the good things that language give us, and there are also the things that language, the traps that language kind of helps organize itself around. And so, from a clinical perspective, it really looks like, well, who's the person sitting across from you? And maybe the person sitting across from you is you in that regard. This is by no means um, something that needs to be facilitated by someone else, though I would encourage and acknowledge that if individuals are experiencing discontent, distress, suffering to such a level that they would really like to see an adjustment made in that, I cannot I cannot advocate strongly enough that they seek out the mental health professional that is going to help them along that journey. Now, for behavior analysts, again, not coming from that clinical background, well, it's going to look different because the work that we do is different. I think you can consider that this is not although it's a therapeutic environment. Again, thinking about traditional applied behavior analysis, and whether that's working with an individual that has a diagnosis of autism, whether you're working in business and industry, whether you're working with athletes, whatever. If you're sitting across or whatever, standing across from another human being, there are features of the ACT perspective that I think are going to be amenable to the behavior analytic perspective, especially when we're working significantly in the realm of language. And I say language, but you could easily replace that with verbal behavior if you prefer that phrase, given its connotations to Skinnerian theory in that regard. So how does it look? Well, it depends. That's a good behavior analytic answer. You can't get away from that. It's going to depend. But
Yeah.
perhaps
Very true.
maybe to give a little bit more teeth to this, let's say, for example, you're an applied behavior analyst that has a rich tradition in understanding the functions of behavior. That's probably going to resonate well with almost all of the audience, right? That's a feature of our application. Well, the same would be true if you're looking at behaviors that are language based, and whether or not that's what people say out loud or it's what they say to themselves. So, in a much more subtle way that might be more difficult to detect as an observer. Um, what you're interested in is those kinds of behaviors, language behavior, and the relationship that language has on other activities in their life, then you're going to start to leverage. And now I'm doing if you're watching this, I'm going side to side because when I go side to side, this is gonna mean that I'm gonna be a little bit more colloquial, just from the standpoint of trying to be clear. I should also say, although I may dip into colloquialisms, I think there's much to admire from the contextual behavior science community. This is a vibrant community. There are a lot of dedicated researchers, scientists, practitioners So if you're interested in a much more substantive, technical uh, uh, articulation of these things, well, they have over 40 years of literature, especially as it comes to ACT. I mean, that really some of the early beginnings, the late 70s. And so if you're looking for really substantive, technical reflections of these descriptions, you're going to find them in that community. I'm not gonna pretend to just copy others in that regard. But going back to, what's that going to look like? Well, you're going to kind of look at where that distress is coming from, and you're going to start to kind of um, lean on or leverage aspects that the ACT community has deemed to be helpful or has demonstrated to be very helpful for others. And whether that's clarifying your values, or said more simply, what is it that you think or what is it that you care about? A lot of the work is organized around, well, you said you care about this. So how does our behavior participate toward that thing that you say you care about? Or how does it have it be either further from access to the things you said are important to you? And so there's going to be some values work. Um, there may be, and this is perhaps what we'll get to a little bit later as it relates to precision teaching and inner behavior that they've talked about in that community. But there may be some deliteralization or some diffusion from your thoughts in the sense that you're going to create some distance, again, speaking metaphorically, between the idea that you are your thoughts or this is who I am, because this is how I describe myself or how these descriptions occur to me, to understanding that these descriptions or these thoughts or these phrases are a part of me for sure, but that's not who I am literally. You start to create some distance or you diffuse from this idea that this is who I am. It's more of a, this is a thought I have, or this is a way I have described myself, or a way that others describe me, versus that's who I am. Those are just some brief examples. And let me just say one more thing on the topic of, well, what is this going to look like? Well, the topic of mindfulness, for example, not unique to ACT by any means, though the ACT community certainly incorporates a strong element of being in contact with the present moment, mindfulness, maybe as it is described more generally. Um, that is something that I have used with individuals that would otherwise you would not think would be appropriate for ACT style intervention, because perhaps the sophistication of their language or communication, um, at, at least from an observer's perspective, seems like it's not quite where it needs to be to benefit from ACT. That's something I would challenge in that regard, is that there are aspects to an ACT perspective that you can use, I would argue, with any of the people that you serve in that regard.
Well, that's you. You know what? You brought us to the end of our first section, so I'm going to give us the listeners the first secret word, and that is winter. This first secret word is winter. Well, this brings us to our second part, and it's building on some of the things that you mentioned in the first part, Tim. The implementation of behavior analysts or practitioners. But one thing that you said earlier that I want to just get back to, I think it has some relevancy, is you mentioned that you doesn't necessarily represent someone who were trained in the whole, but could implement those parts. So is ACT able to be sliced up into some strategies, or is it an all-encompassing technique that's got to be implemented as a whole? And thinking about that in practice.
Oh, that's a great question. And I think that, in clinical psychology, there's always been a long-standing tradition of manualizing, formalizing a particular approach to clinical practice. And that is that's a valiant effort and things like that. I think that one of the features of contextual behavior science and ACT's application of that science is that it is pragmatic to its core. And so I think for those individuals that have that comprehensive foundation, that really come at this as an ACT practitioner, they're likely to have this comprehensive vantage. And you may not see that comprehensiveness in the day-to-day activities as they work with their client base, but their approach is comprehensive. And so I think that, the same is true for behavior analysis, applied behavior analysis. is
That's
that
what I was just going to say. Yeah.
yeah, I see a lot of overlap, at least in that, is that, there's an enormous amount of depth that experts in ACT are resting upon. And I think for those behavior analysts that are interested in learning more about this, that community has made it abundantly easy to contact resources, mentorship, and opportunities to see where your applied behavior analytic activities could be enhanced by incorporating ACT perspectives in that regard. And so I wonder if I might just adjust the question ever so slightly as to not focus too much on, well, can I just take parts that I like? Well, that's true of any sort of an eclectic approach to
Mhm.
practice. Um, but that eclecticism can be perhaps more formalized if you take a more sort of comprehensive approach. Doesn't mean that everything you do is going to be um, you'd be able to kind of draw a specific line of like, that's what he's trying to do, or that's what they're trying to accomplish. But yeah, I think it's more of a where, where are you coming from, and how does your approach reflect that frankly, that theoretical foundation that you ascribe to.
So, as a follow up to that, you could see someone, let's say you're working with an individual, they're a teenager, they're having difficulties in a classroom. You could see the ABA side looking at certain things that maybe the teacher could be doing, changing the environment, et cetera. And then you're also saying that there are some aspects that can be pulled on from ACT that may help with that individual interacting with their peers, and what they are thinking about themselves, not necessarily teaching math, but how they're focused in about themselves and what's going on there as a supportive environment or supportive aspect to it. So it's not picking and choosing in the sense, but it is having a bag full of tools that you can use in the situation. Is that, am I using that right then?
Yeah, I think so, Doug. I think that as behavior analysts, we're not done when our training stops. We're constantly learning. We're constantly
Definitely.
refining our approach, and we remain curious. And I think that for a lot of people, and I'll speak from my own personal experience, and hopefully it resonates with audience members, is that there's a lot of times where you're working with another person, and it doesn't matter how old they are. And you just know that there's more going on than what you feel like your current toolbox is able to make a meaningful impact on. And in my applied experience, whether it's working with parents, school aged kids, young kids, I don't have a ton of experience with adults. And so most of it is kind of, K through 12 type, so
Mhm.
kids and teenagers. But I certainly from the adult perspective, that's there too. Incorporating um, a more appreciation for the way that language has an impact on our day-to-day activities uh, has made a big shift in my effectiveness. And furthermore, the ability to relate with other people, and certainly those that I serve from a clinical perspective. And that's what ACT does. If it's not ACT for you, that's okay. There are other areas that you can go and gain knowledge about and gain experience. Whatever we can do to better impact the scope of the human condition, which is behavior, then I think we're moving in the right direction. I think ACT does a fair bit in contribution to letting us access more of the human condition. Um, and I think that from a behavior analytics standpoint, just because there's a lot of continuity, behavior analysts tend to like ACT as a preference side of things because it aligns very well with our basic assumptions about behavior. There's nothing magical about ACT. There's not really like a new principle. Like now there's an ACT principle. It's not like that. It's going to align very well with a contingency analysis. It's going to align very well with a functional approach to understanding behavior. Um, yeah. So hopefully I answered the question somewhere inside of that. Doug.
Yeah, definitely you
Okay.
did. Thank you.
There are many intriguing things that you just said, and I don't even know which direction to go down because you're sparking all these ideas in me. But you did say that the language component was really important, and I agree with you. I feel in behavior analysis, when things happen inside the skin, what Skinner called private events, uh, that's an area that is so unexplored in behavior analysis. In my experience, and this is, I'll speak for Doug too, when we have
Nice.
talked about our research in the past, we have had people that have questioned our commitment to behavior analysis just because we've been trying to explore these things that happen to all of us inside. I mean, we all have emotions, we all have feelings, we all have urges. We're humans. And there's certainly a vein of practitioners who I would characterize as methodological behavior analysts who prefer not to deal with the uncomfortableness of trying to figure out, well, how do we help people? And my thought has always been, well, if you have someone that comes to you with depression and is just feeling really poor, people say, well, look for the external behaviors and somehow try to figure out, that's a proxy to what's going on inside. But that's just not a good way to look at it from a behavior analytic standpoint, where if you have something that's happening inside, can you directly impact what's going on inside? And that's certainly what I'm getting from what you're saying. So there's this acceptance and there's the commitment, which is part of the big part of ACT. And maybe you could just quickly flesh out, if you had someone that came up with said, "Hey, I have depression. I feel really bad about myself all the time." What would an ACT practitioner generally do to approach and help that person feel better, to alleviate their suffering?
Uh,
And you get to say it depends right off the
yeah.
bat.
Okay. Well, then I don't have to say it,
Uh,
certainly. Well, I guess the first thing I would say, if someone said to me, Tim, I'm feeling depressed, I could really use help, I would say, well, let me first draw your attention to any one of my wonderful clinical colleagues that are in a much better position to provide that kind of clinical therapeutic sort of thing. Now, that
yeah,
being
this
said,
is a hypothetical. Hypothetical.
hypothetical, of course, hypothetical, but not that notwithstanding, I think this is a really good one. I mean, whether your experience that we would call depression rises to the level of clinical significance, where really having the support and help of a professional inside of the clinical psychology space, whether that has risen to that level or not, I think all human beings fall within or have had some experience with depressive thoughts. I mean, it would just, and if you haven't, bless you. Goodness gracious. I don't know if I'm envious or I'm worried. I don't know where I would fall on that side of things. But I think the thing that an ACT practitioner, starts to look at, and you kind of mentioned, it's in the name, right? There's this element of acceptance. And acceptance doesn't mean agreement. And acceptance doesn't mean I like it. And acceptance doesn't mean I don't want things to change. Acceptance really, as its fundamental position statement, is that I received something. I acknowledge it. I say that that's what that is. I have this thought. I'm feeling these things. I think of myself like this. So that's one side of things. Acceptance is really just the first little crack in the shell that really allows you to explore what could be possible outside of that. Acceptance isn't a big part, but it's such an important part. So first, you just have to be willing to receive it, like that. I'm acknowledging its truth in like a substantive way, right? Not truth as in capital T, but it's like, this is there. So that's acceptance point. Well, you said you wanted to do something. You said you wanted something to be different. You said that these kinds of things in your life are important to you. And so let's take a look and see, well, how am I organizing my efforts in relationship to the things I said I care about? And if you have good alignment, well, then you're probably not experiencing a lot of that discontent. At least that's what the research shows, right? If you have good continuity between, I say these things are important and I do things that participate in the things that I say are important, you're probably living a pretty fulfilled life. And the things you say are important, they can grow and refine. And sometimes you dump some and add others. And, that all happens. But for individuals, I mean, this is the opposite of cognitive dissonance, right? I say these things are important, but then I do all of these other things
Yeah.
that actually draw me further away from
Yeah.
getting that. And that's really about bringing that kind of alignment. You say what's important. I don't say what's important. I don't judge it. This is you. You tell me, what do you think is important? What do you want to organize your life around? And then you start looking at, okay, well, how do I organize my efforts in a way that are going to bring me closer and closer to those things? And by extension, that would mean that they're going to bring me further and further of these things that may cause me distress or may cause me to feel those kinds of feelings, have those thoughts that you mentioned. I'll pause there. I don't want to ramble. I fear that I'm getting close to rambling.
You do it fine.
Um, Rick, did I touch on that? Did I get to that issue? Or did I miss something?
That was perfect. It was so good. It brings us to our second secret word, which is holiday. We got one section left. This third part is it's interesting to me because I was recently at a conference, and as I said earlier, both Doug and I have done research that comes out of the precision teaching community, which is called inner behavior. Inner behavior, people use outer behavior, inner behavior, public, private. These are distinctions that have been made in the literature and things that we have looked at in our career. And just to give you a quick rundown, people that do inner behavior, this is a way to either balance or change some behavior that's inside you that we have no
The
ability to
individual.
see. Yeah.
The individual has total access to it, but no one else does.
Yes.
Sure.
And it's a simple self-counting procedure. If like I asked you earlier before about, let's say you have someone that says, well, I'm feeling depressed. I can't give you I can't give you the language to explain what you're feeling inside because I have no ability to know that. So the person has to pinpoint what they are feeling. And again, this brings up all kinds of problems from a research perspective because, oh my God, there can't be any IOA because if you're going to do something in self-count, how do I know you're not lying to me? Those are the typical objections you get. But what this research shows through many, many people doing it across many different situations, time, that if you can pinpoint a behavior and you self-count it, and let's say that whatever the depressive behavior is, I have 200 that I've counted in 8 hours or whatever the time frame is. The intervention oftentimes would involve thinking about something that will compete with that or maybe be opposite of that. And maybe it's happy thoughts and when you tell, it's not thinking the same thing as like, I am happy, I am happy, you're not repeating the same thing.
Yeah.
You are coming up with all independent thoughts. And what this research has shown through many different pinpoints is that as people engage in this self-counting for 1 minute and that increases, they will see a change in the inners. And this is, there's a lot of literature behind this. And so at any rate, I presented this and someone asked me the question who knows ACT very well and said, what would be the difference between how a person, an ACT practitioner would look at, is it psychological flexibility, I think was the term he used.
Yeah.
Is that the right term? Okay. And
Perhaps.
really, I didn't know it well enough. But just based on that understanding and how we might approach in saying to someone, hey, here's one way of dealing with these troublesome inner behaviors. How would you compare or contrast that with how someone doing ACT might look at that?
It's a great question. And thank you, Rick, again for passing along some articles that not only demonstrated the effect that you just outlined, but it was very helpful in preparation of this. So, um, forgive me. I don't know if I heard in that a criticism from the questioner in terms of I heard curiosity in that, of like, how would it be different? And I think that, you used the
Not
phrase,
criticism. Let me stop before you
Yeah.
give your answer. This was a question that was genuinely asked about, not as one better than the other,
Mhm.
but just how are these two things
Different.
different? So,
Yeah.
I'm not pitting one as one
Yeah.
has to be better than the other, but just
No.
how are they different?
No, yeah, absolutely. And I don't know, I wouldn't be surprised if you could find an ACT practitioner that would incorporate these 1-minute timings of, kind of free say, nice things about yourself, as an example. Meaning that the topography of the intervention is not incompatible with what might be used from an ACTS perspective. There may be some emphasis on describing what's happening is a little different. There might be, but that's to be expected. The ACT perspective is going to have perhaps some different descriptors than the precision teaching community might have, maybe. But again, they're all from the same. They're all in the swimming in the same pool. Um, you mentioned this notion of psychological flexibility. Well, psychological flexibility is essentially that contextual perspective that, again, if I have alignment in my life, I say these things are important and my behavior moves me in the direction toward those things, or at least the experience of fulfillment towards those things, then I'm able to maneuver through the trials and tribulations of life. And I can better pivot and not get so stuck by the things in everyday life. That would be what is sort of known as psychological flexibility. That sounds great. If you had an individual for whom pervasive, uh, disparaging thoughts were at such a frequency that they came to you and said, as was indicated by the research article you sent me, said, I want something to be different. And you provided, look, a very, uh, uh, what's a good word? A very effective opportunity. It's low cost, it doesn't take a lot of time, and if the end result was that their experience of having those disparaging thoughts were less, and their experience of having the alternative thoughts were more, you could take that finding and describe it from an ACT perspective if you wanted to, or you could just describe it as it was described in those articles that you sent, that were outlining what you observed. Look, this is what you did, and this is what the end result was. Seems pretty good. Um, I think that um, I don't know what an ACT clinician would say because that ACT clinician didn't do that research, but I bet they, I bet it wouldn't be hard to find a few of them that would look at that and say, "Oh, be darned, that sounds like a pretty cool intervention. I bet I could use that inside of my own clinical therapy." I bet I could create that as an opportunity to help adjust the contextual features um, that are occurring for that individual by doing a very elegant series of timings. I imagine you probably had them self chart that too. Would be the case. Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, I see a lot of coherence a bit between the two. Um, at least with regard to that. Um, yeah.
This is gonna I get to display my naivete. Um, does an act someone who's so unfamiliar, obviously, with the maintaining counts, daily counts of those um, inner thoughts, feelings, private events, do, does the ACT professional deal with those same types of numbers? Do they come with hard numbers, or the the therapy or the talking, is that dealing more with the time that they're interacting? I may send you home with homework, or I may send you, and then are they interacting with frequency counts, or are they interacting with any type of counts away from the therapeutic setting? Or and that would be a big difference that I'm hearing. I'm not saying one is better or worse. I'm not sure that they do that.
Well, that's a great
Is
question,
that a
Doug.
comment?
Well, no, I think the easy answer is no. I think that
Okay.
the adherence in the precision teaching community to count in time, and then charting that frequency on a standard acceleration chart, you are not going to see that um, in a robust way in the ACT community. And that's by no means because it's probably because they just don't know about it. Now, there is a difference. There was an individual that I do remember, clinical psychologist, has charts in this, incorporated it into their clinical practice. I do not know where they are, not only in this moment, but more generally. Um, but I
Yeah.
do remember that it was presented at an ACT conference, and I think that there was, again, so it's not like there would be a complete unfamiliarity with precision teaching more
No.
generally, but to that issue of that commitment to frequency, and that frequency can be displayed on a standard acceleration chart, is unique to precision teaching. And the community
I
is,
meant
yeah,
don't mean to interrupt you, but I'm going to. I don't mean just on a chart. I mean the data collection away from it. What's the data collection? So if that individual, let's say you're my clinician, I'm working with you on something. When I leave, do I still do things, or do I come back and work with you? I'm just trying to figure out how that's implemented. Do I interact with numbers for myself? Do I keep a diary about things? Do I bring something back, naturalistic observation, trying to align certain things? I'm just wondering what the reporting is back to the therapist, because the reporting for private events is, here's my acceleration.
yeah.
I mean, it's like, we'll review everything that counts, what's in, boom, here's your acceleration. All right, now we're going to implement it, something. We're going to look at a change. What's the turn? But what's the kind of the feedback back and forth from that clinician and the client?
Well, certainly from a research perspective, I think you're going to get a little closer to the kind of robust empiricism that you're aligning with in the precision teaching community. I would say that
Okay.
the ACT community has a pretty robust empirical foundation.
Hmm.
Their reliance on one dependent variable is not going to be, if that's that there is going to be a difference there. But also consider from the ACT community, they're not just behavior analysts. There's a huge number of people that have been attracted to ACT that may or may not have that empirical background. They might be sole practitioners that are really interested in providing that kind of clinical therapeutic side of things. I wouldn't be able to tell you with authority the diversity of dependent measures that they're doing in the applied setting. I don't have a confidence to know exactly.
Okay.
But from a behavior analytic perspective, let's say, how would a behavior analyst look at this? Well,
Hmm.
perhaps what I might do is, again, maintaining a really pragmatic approach in my applied discipline. Although it may be the case that the individual has said that they would like to see a reduction in these thoughts, just to follow this theme, it may be prudent for me to measure that, to have indications of that. That could absolutely be incorporated. But it also may actually have more meaning for me to measure their activity towards other things. They've declared that these kinds of thoughts are getting in the way, but then they've declared that these are the types of things that are important to me. Having meaningful relationships, participating well in school, and getting, let's say, good grades or something. So I might kind of pivot more toward my empirical observation towards those things they've said are important to them. If that includes, a count function, certainly I could see that being incorporated into the clinical practice.
So I see the alignment of, what do you say you want to do? And that way, when we get back together, I can share this information. Hey, you said you wanted to do this, but you're really not doing this. What's up? Versus, hey, you said you wanted to do this and you started to do this. How'd that feel? Kind of thing. Where
Sure.
rather than just telling you did 6, did 5. So it's a little slighted. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I found really nice um, in the paper that you sent, Rick, from 2021, so relatively recently, I mean, very recently in the academic sense, where you included a social validity measure of the individual, and they had reported that this was a really meaningful intervention and that they really enjoyed it. And I think that that alone is enough evidence to firmly root this in a pragmatic approach. This worked for this person, and the idea that it could work for others is really clearly laid out. Whether or not you approach that from an ACT perspective, or you approach that from any other clinical perspective, is sort of moot. It's a really elegant way to incorporate it in any other interpretation of those events. So
Great. That brings us to our last secret word, which is season. No, Tim, there has been so much, like these 30 minutes just go by way
I know.
too
know.
quickly. If, just as a parting, real brief question, if some of our audience members wanted to learn more about contextual behavioral science, ACT, RFT, or any, maybe, well, those two areas in general, what would you recommend as place other than going to grad school and getting a degree in this,
Certainly.
which you certainly can do?
You can do. And for those that want to dedicate their professional life to that, by all means, please do. I think the world is made better by curious, smart people going out that want to make a difference. And if you see a way of making a difference using this, hey, do that. I think for a lot of professionals that have already concluded their formal graduate training, but that maintain that lifelong learning mentality, which I think is something that really unifies behavior analysts, something that I really appreciate about our discipline. I would go to contextualbehaviorscience.org or .com. Just Google contextual behavior science, and they make it very easy for you to know how to learn more, how to get involved for your own professional career, and maybe what the next step might be for you, whether that's taking a really intensive boot camp. They have boot camps that are specifically designed for behavior analysts. It's a great introduction. There's some really good experiential components to that. They also have a really good, these are academics. I mean, it has a strong academic focus. And so access to not only peer-reviewed publications, books that have been written on it, but also popular press material as well. So if you're trying to find your way in, like getting introduced to music that you're kind of not sure about, you got to find your own little way in. And I will say something I admire about that community. They give you a lot of different ways in. For me, it was more on the experimental and theoretical side of things. For others, it's purely on the application side of things. They make it, the bar is low for entry. And then from there, you really get to kind of craft your own adventure. It's got a very generous community of people that want to help people. And so that's an easy place, an easy community to come into with regard to that. So yeah, check out their main website, Contextual Behavior Science, and then go from there. Like I said, they make it easy for you.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you for your time. This was a fabulous interview. When you're talking about music, I thought you might put out a Mama Cass reference, play your own kind of music. I thought you were going to go there, but I'll bring it up.
Oh, thank you, Ray.
We had that music. I would play you off to it.
Okay.
To that song.
I'll play it privately to myself. That's what I'll do.
So on behalf of Doug and all the listeners from ABA On Call, we thank you for your time, and we'll see all of you during the next episode.
Thanks for watching this episode of ABA On Call. To get your CEU, follow the link and instructions below the video. You can enjoy the program again there, or you can go straight to the attendance verification quiz. Just enter the secret words and pay the CEU fee to generate your certificate.